One of the things that economists and investors and business commentators love to remind us is that business and investment hate uncertainty. They run from uncertainty and they abhor it. When it comes to the tariffs, this was kind of a talking point for the tariffs. See what it's doing to the markets. There were plenty of narratives in the financial media about how this was going to be devastating to all of these companies and manufacturers and so on. So there was a big hullabaloo in the markets. Things went up and down, and a month and a half later, the markets are sitting where they were. And in addition to that, a lot of countries that tariffs were imposed on are essentially now just accepting that they will be tariffed, and they're just thankful that they're not going to be tariffed at the rates that were first mentioned, the Liberation Day tariffs that were trotted out there by Trump as really just a negotiating tool. And so they're all breathing a sigh of relief now that that's not going to be the case. But when it comes to economics, you always have what's seen and you have what's unseen. And one of the things that has slipped under the radar unseen is just how many manufacturers are moving their production to the United States, and a lot of them are moving it this year to the United States from foreign countries. So Reuters has published a list of a number of these manufacturers, quite a long list, and what I was going to do is just go through this list and give you some of the companies and what they're doing. I'll just go down the list of some of these companies and some of what they're doing. The interesting thing is some of these companies are actually moving production from facilities in Mexico to the United States, which is quite interesting actually. Especially some appliance makers, white goods makers, moving their production to the United States from Mexico. We're told that, the typical story is that it's not economical to produce washing machines or dryers or white goods in the United States, but that's obviously not true. So going down the list, Barry Callebaut, which is a Swiss chocolate maker. They're planning to increase their U.S.-based production to fend off the disruptive environment, which is the tariffs environment. BMW, they're adding shifts to their Spartanburg plant in South Carolina to boost output up to 80,000 units. Campari Spirits, they're assessing opportunities to expand U.S. production. Compal Electronics, Taiwanese contract laptop manufacturer, may expand in the U.S. and has spoken to several southern states about possible investment. Essity, a Swedish hygiene product maker, could move more of its production to the U.S. from Mexico and from Canada. Honda, Japanese car maker, plans to move some car production from Mexico and Canada into the United States, aiming to make 90% of its cars sold in the country locally. That's quite a big improvement, I would say. Hyundai Motor, South Korean automaker, plans to further localize production in the U.S. and make hybrid vehicles at their new factory in Georgia. Illy Cafe, Italian premium coffee maker, will look at building a plant in the U.S. If it gets caught up in tariffs. So they'll be building a plant in the U.S. if there are tariffs applied to their coffee. Invitech, a Taiwanese company, makes AI servers that use NVIDIA chips, has agreed to invest $85 million to build a manufacturing facility in Texas. IQE, British semiconductor company, looking at moving some of their production to the U.S. as it guards against potential duties in the chip sector. So you have all these semiconductor companies moving to the U.S. Lavazza Italian Coffee, they plan to move ahead with the U.S. expansion. LG Electronics, now this is the white goods. The electronics giant is considering moving production of manufacturing of refrigerators from Mexico to its factory in Tennessee. Then we have Apple. Now, Apple's a company I've spoken about before. I just posted a video on Apple, and kind of how China captured Apple, which you might be interested in seeing how China essentially managed to capture Apple as a company and get all their manufacturing going from zero manufacturing in 1999 to almost all of Apple's manufacturing in 2009. It's quite an interesting story. Journalist named Patrick McGee has written a book on this, and in that video I show lots of clips from an interview he just did with the Free Press about how Apple actually did this. So you might want to check out that video. Anyway, on to Luxshare. They're an Apple supplier. They're looking into ways to respond to the tariffs by shifting more production outside China and into the United States. LVMH, the luxury conglomerate, is seriously considering bulking up its U.S. production capacities. Nissan Motor, their ways moving its production of its Sentra automobile from Mexico to the United States. More Mexican production moving to the United States. They're weighing it. And let's see, Novartis, the Swiss drug maker, plans to invest $23 billion to expand 10 facilities in the United States. Now, I also made a video on the pharmaceutical industry, essentially investing $166 billion into the United States, a number of companies. If you're interested in strictly the pharmaceutical industry, I've also recently did a video on that. Stellantis, the Chrysler parent, is moving forward with plans to build mid-sized pickup trucks in Belvidere, Illinois. TSMC, I've also covered TSMC. They're expanding investment in the United States, planning to build 5 chip facilities there in the coming years. That's something we've known about. And Volkswagen's Audi brand will expand production in North America and focus on its most important cars in the United States, and will soon make a decision on where to base itself this year in the United States. So that's kind of interesting. Volvo Cars as well will move some production to the U.S. depending on tariffs. Well, I'll imagine they will move some production to the U.S. depending on tariffs. So then we have another article, this one from the South China Morning Post, about how Chinese companies are moving to the U.S. to set up manufacturing in the United States. And this article is Chinese firms race to open U.S. factories to avoid sky-high tariffs. And one of the things I wanted to do is get a few quotes out of this. And they profile a small electronics manufacturer. I won't say small, it's not a major company, but they are opening a factory in Reno, Nevada to assemble sensor modules. And they're an electronics component manufacturer. Now, this is one of their manufacturing processes that requires a small amount of labor, but it's a step in setting up the manufacturing supply chain in the United States. They're going to also have to find suppliers in the United States to supply them with various products. So let me quote here. The guy's name is Leo Lee, and he says the biggest problem for Chinese firms setting up factories in the U.S. is the lack of complete supply chain. Companies often struggle to source materials or equipment locally, even when they're willing to pay higher prices. Nevertheless, the move is still worth it, Lee added. Producing locally in the U.S. not only offers the chance to avoid tariffs, but also a chance to earn higher profit margin on certain items, such as injection molded products. Yes, the cost may rise, but it won't be as bad as the 145% tariffs. Well, the 145% tariffs are going away, but they're going to continue with this anyway. In some industries, the trade war looks to set up a major upheaval of supply chains. For China's downstream petrochemicals firms, building American factories now looks like a logical move, according to Yi Yingmin, founder of the Beijing-based chemicals and energy industry consulting firm Chem One. Previously, firms would import their raw materials from the U.S., send the finished goods back to America after processing, Yi explained. But the business model would potentially now expose companies to 2 rounds of higher import duties. For downstream processing in the petrochemical industry, where raw materials account for 80 to 90% of the costs, even a 10% tariff has a significant operational impact. Within the next 2 years, there's likely to be a significant wave of investment from Chinese petrochemical firms flooding into the U.S. market, he predicted. His firm is also opening the first overseas branch in Houston, Texas, to support the influx of Chinese capital. And that's because with a lot of these companies, a lot of these manufacturing companies, the petrochemical materials cost is the biggest cost component of their product. So it makes sense to manufacture this stuff in the United States. So here's one more that was kind of unexpected for me, is Chinese golf cart makers moving to the U.S. to dodge tariffs. And that's because some Chinese manufacturers have been hit with 1,000% hike in import duties, pushing them to production in America. So golf cart manufacturers manufacturing electric golf carts, battery-powered golf carts, are going to be setting up manufacturing in the United States. This is Chinese companies. So just to round out here, there are a number of companies that are moving production out of China, not necessarily moving to the United States, at least not yet. HP says 90% of their products for the U.S. will be made outside of China by October. Then we also have a story with Lenovo, which is a Chinese company, by the way. They were initially the part of IBM's notebook or PC business, I believe. They sold it off to Lenovo. Anyway, Lenovo joins growing China exodus as manufacturers flee U.S. tariffs, OEM moving production lines to India. So they're moving to India. Most of their production is moving to India. And then we even have some U.S. companies that are moving out of China. Generac CEO says they will slash their reliance on Chinese supply chains within 18 months. So within 18 months, they're slashing their supply chain in China. They'll reduce it to 10%. 5% in 18 months. Now, obviously, a lot of that supply chain is moving to places like India, but I don't think they're going to have the best go of it for importing into the U.S. from India either, and they'll find it advantageous to be manufacturing more and more in the United States. And as all these companies come back to the United States, the supply chains within the United States are grown and strengthened. Another U.S. company called Wise, they make electronic peripherals. They mentioned this about a month ago, I think, or no, just about 2 weeks ago. They said they are going to be out of China in 60 days after they got their first tariff bill. So you can see how quickly these companies move. We're often told that it'll take years to move the supply chains. These companies move these supply chains in months or under a year sometimes. As I said, previously, Apple moved from 0 production to 100% production in less than 10 years. So it can be done, and that was when they moved into China. They were somewhat skeptical about it in the first few years. Anyway, the other company is Yeti. They make tumblers and drinkware. 80% of production will move out of China this year. So we can already see just within a few months there is a massive move to production in the United States and a massive move away from China. And the tariffs haven't even been settled yet, but these companies are already announcing their move into the United States because it is certain that there will be no tariffs on these products when they're manufactured in the United States. Anyway, if you like this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and I'll bring you more in the future.